When the storms of life hit, what is the anchor that keeps you from drifting away? We explore the stories of faith, love, and loyalty that hold us together when everything else falls apart. Subscribe today and find your own anchor in our stories.
I'm 63 years old, and I never thought I would be the kind of woman who changes her locks. I was raised to keep the door open. My mother used to say that a home with locked doors is just a house, and I believed her for most of my life. I believed a lot of things for most of my life. My name is Estelle. I live in a 2-story colonial on Birchwood Lane in Columbus, Ohio, and I have lived there for 31 years. My husband Franklin bought that house the year our daughter was born. He painted the shutters himself, forest green because I loved the color, and he redid the back porch the summer before he died. That was 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. I held his hand when he went, and then I sat in our bedroom for 2 days before I could make myself get up and call anyone. Franklin left me the house, a small life insurance policy, and 37 years of knowing what it felt like to be truly loved by someone. He also left me a son, our son. 28 years old when his father died, already married, already a father himself. His name is Curtis. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I loved my son with everything I had. I drove 4 hours every Thanksgiving to sit at his in-laws' table when he couldn't come to me. I kept his daughter every summer for 2 weeks so he and his wife could have time alone. I sent money when they asked, and sometimes when they didn't ask, but I could tell they needed it. I was not a difficult mother. I was not demanding. I asked for very little and I gave everything I could, and for a long time I told myself that was what love looked like. It took me a long time to see what I had actually built. Curtis had worked at his father-in-law's real estate company since before he and Melissa got married. That's my daughter-in-law, Melissa. She came from a family with money. Not obscene money, but comfortable money. The kind where nobody worries about the electric bill and everyone gets new cars on their 30th birthdays. Her father, a man named Hugh, had built a property management business over 20 years, and Curtis had walked right into a junior partner position the year they got engaged. I never begrudged that. Franklin would have been proud to see his son doing well. I just didn't understand, not for a long time, how much Curtis had come to believe that success was something that happened to him rather than something he earned. For the first few years after Franklin died, I managed fine on my own. The house was paid off. I had Franklin's life insurance. I had my small pension from 30 years of working as an office administrator at Columbus General. I was not rich, but I was stable and I had worked very hard to stay that way. Over those 9 years, I had saved just over $90,000. It was sitting in 2 accounts of my bank, one checking, one savings. I had given Curtis power of attorney over both accounts 3 years after his father died because I had a health scare, a false alarm as it turned out. And I didn't want to leave my affairs in disorder if something happened to me. That decision would cost me everything. Almost. I'm going to tell you what happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I woke up at 6:30 the way I always do, made my coffee, let the dog out into the backyard. I was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper when my phone rang. It was Curtis. I remember thinking it was early for him to call. He's never been a morning person. And I felt that small squeeze of worry a mother always feels when the phone rings at an odd hour. He didn't say hello. He said, "I need you to know that I took care of some things. The accounts are cleared out, and I've been in contact with Hugh's attorney about the house. There's a buyer lined up. You'll get 30 days to relocate." I sat there with my coffee cup halfway to my mouth, and I said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "There's a lot I need to explain, but not right now. Hugh is restructuring the business and I need capital. You have capital. You're 63, Mom. You're healthy. You can start over." I put the coffee cup down very carefully. I said, "Curtis, have you lost your mind?" He said, "I knew you'd react this way. I knew you wouldn't understand." And then he said he had to go and the line went dead. I sat at that table for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat there with the dog at my feet and the newspaper open to the crossword, and I thought about what my son had just told me. Then I picked up the phone and called my bank. The savings account was empty. The checking account had a balance of $12.40. $90,000 gone. The timestamp on the withdrawals showed they had been made over the previous 11 days, in increments just small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. Not an accident. Not a moment of desperation. A plan. The woman at the bank was kind. She walked me through the documentation. She confirmed that the withdrawals had been made using the power of attorney I had signed 3 years prior. She told me what I already knew, that legally the power of attorney gave him the right to do exactly what he had done. She also told me, quietly, that this was not the first time she had seen something like this and that I should contact an attorney. I called my neighbor Paulette before I called an attorney. Paulette is 71 and has known me since our children were in elementary school together, and she said 4 words when I told her what happened. She said, "Do not sign anything." I didn't know yet why those 4 words mattered as much as they did. I would find out soon. 2 days later, a man in a gray sedan pulled up in front of my house. He was from Hughes' real estate office. He had a folder of documents, a purchase and sale agreement for the house on Birchwood Lane, signed by a buyer, with a transfer of property form that only required my signature. The offer was $2,000 and $12,000. I had looked it up already. The house was worth $340,000. I looked at the man in the gray sedan. I said, "I'm not signing anything today." He said, "I understand. But Mr. Cole, Holloway, that was you and would appreciate if you could move quickly on this." I said, "I imagine he would." And I closed the door. That same afternoon, I called an attorney named Vivian, who had been recommended by a woman in my church group. Vivian was sharp and direct, and she didn't soften things to make me feel better, which was exactly what I needed. She told me that the power of attorney could be revoked immediately, in writing, and that I needed to do it that day. She told me that the house was in my name alone. Franklin had made sure of that when we did our estate planning years ago, and that no one could compel me to sell it. She told me that the money was a more complicated situation, but that because the withdrawals had been made systematically and in a pattern that suggested intent to defraud, there was a basis for a criminal complaint. I asked her to be direct with me. I said, "If I file a complaint against my son, what happens to him?" She said he could face charges, depending on how the DA looks at it, possibly felony theft by deception. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I said, "What are my options?" She gave me 3. I could pursue criminal charges, which would go through the DA's office, and I would have limited control over the outcome. I could pursue civil recovery, suing Curtis directly to get the money back, which would be slower but more controlled. Or I could do both. She recommended both. I went home that night and I sat in the house Franklin had painted with forest grain shutters, and I made my decision. I revoked the power of attorney. I filed a police report, and then I waited. Curtis didn't call for 11 days. When he did, it wasn't to apologize. He called to tell me that he had heard I had spoken to an attorney and that he thought we should handle this as a family. He used that phrase 3 times in the same conversation. Handle this as a family. I said, "Which family, Curtis? The one where you took $90,000 from your mother? Or the one where I raised you for 28 years before you apparently decided I was an asset to liquidate?" He said I was being dramatic. I said I was being dramatic. I said I was being accurate. He said Melissa's father was in financial trouble, real trouble, and that the business was failing, and that he had panicked. He said he had intended to pay me back before I even noticed. He said a lot of things, and underneath all of them I could hear the voice of my son at 12 years old, explaining to me why the broken lamp wasn't his fault. He had never fully learned that explanation is not the same as accountability. I said, "Then you should have come to me. You should have sat down at my kitchen table and told me what was happening. I would have helped you. I would have found a way." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd have enough." I understood then what he actually thought of me. Not that I was strong. Not that I was capable. He thought of me as a resource with a limit, and he had decided to take what he could before the limit ran out. The investigation moved slowly. The detective assigned to the case was professional and thorough, and over the following weeks I learned more about my son's financial situation than I had ever wanted to know. The real estate business had been bleeding for 2 years. Hugh had made several bad investments and had borrowed against properties he didn't fully own. Curtis had been aware of this for at least 18 months. He had also, I learned, taken out a second mortgage on his and Melissa's house without telling her, using paperwork that she had signed without reading closely during what he had told her was a routine refinancing. Melissa did not know what he had done to me. When she found out, from the detective, not from Curtis, she called me. I won't pretend that call was simple. Melissa and I had never been close. She was pleasant and polite at holidays and distant the rest of the time. And I'd always sensed that she found me a little too much. Too present, too involved, too loud about my opinions. We had never had a real conversation in 12 years of her being married to my son. But she called me and she was crying, and she said, "Estelle, I didn't know. I need you to know I didn't know." I believed her. Not because I am naive, but because I had been watching my son my whole life, and I recognized the way he moved through the world, always finding the path of least resistance, always managing information to manage people. He would not have told Melissa. Telling her would have required admitting weakness, and Curtis had never been good at that. I told her I believed her. Then I said, "What are you going to do?" She said she didn't know yet. She said her girls, she and Curtis had 2 daughters, 8 and 5, were her first concern. I told her I understood that completely. We talked for almost an hour. It was the longest conversation we had ever had. The charges were filed 6 weeks after I made the initial police report. Curtis was arrested on a Thursday morning at the house he had remortgaged without his wife's knowledge. The charge was felony theft by deception. Bail was set, and Hugh paid it, which I found remarkable given that Hugh was the reason the whole thing had started. What I did not expect was Hugh. 3 days after the arrest, Hugh called me himself. I almost didn't pick up. His number was in my phone from years of holiday logistics, and I had no interest in speaking to him. But something made me answer. Hugh was 70 years old, and he sounded like it. He sounded tired and old and ashamed, which was not how I had ever heard him sound before. He said, "Estelle, I owe you an apology and an explanation." I said, "You owe me $90,000. He said, "Yes, I do." And then he told me something I had not known. 22 years ago, Hugh's first wife, Melissa's mother, who had died when Melissa was in college, had been in a car accident. She had walked away from it. The other driver had not. The other driver had died at the scene, and that driver's name was a name I did not recognize. But the description Hugh gave me, the age, the location, on Route 40 east of Columbus, the year, matched something I had never quite let go of in the back of my mind. Franklin's college roommate. A man named Gerald who had been driving back from visiting us one Sunday evening and never made it home. We had grieved him. Franklin had given a eulogy. The driver who hit him had been cited for running a red light. There had been a settlement that Gerald's family received. We had not known much about the driver. We had not looked for more. Hugh's first wife had run that red light. Hugh had known this for 20 years. He had known it when his daughter married my son. He had said nothing. I sat with the phone against my ear, and I thought about Gerald's wife, who I had lost touch with years ago. I thought about Franklin standing at that podium. I thought about the weight of a secret carried for 2 decades inside a man who had just watched his son-in-law steal from a widow. I said, "Why are you telling me this now?" He said, "Because I'm tired of carrying it, and because you deserve to know." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I said, "Hugh, this doesn't change what Curtis did, and it doesn't change what I'm going to do about it." He said, "I know. I'm not asking you to change anything. I wanted you to know, and I want to make it right. The money. Whatever the legal outcome is, I want to make it right personally. All of it." I told him I would speak to my attorney. The civil case moved alongside the criminal case. Curtis, on the advice of his attorney, agreed to a restitution agreement, full repayment of the $90,000 over a structured schedule, plus interest, in exchange for the DA accepting a plea to a reduced charge. He received 18 months probation and 200 hours of community service. He did not go to prison. I have thought about that a great deal, whether it was the right outcome, and I still don't have a clean answer. The law decided what it decided. What I know is that I got my money back and I kept my house, and I made my son face what he had done in a courtroom with his name on the record. Hugh wrote me a personal check for $30,000, separate from the restitution, with a note that said only, "For Gerald." I deposited it. I sent half to Gerald's daughter, who I tracked down through an old address, and who cried when I called her. She said she had never received anything from the accident. She had not known there was a settlement. That was a story for another day and not mine to tell. But I told her what I knew, and I gave her the name of an attorney, and I let her decide what to do with it. Melissa filed for divorce 4 months after the arrest. She and the girls are in a rental on the east side of Columbus. She and I talk on the phone now, not every week, but often enough. My granddaughters came for spring break, and we baked and watched movies and went to the science museum. The younger one fell asleep on my shoulder on the couch, and I held very still for an hour because I didn't want to wake her. Curtis is living with a friend from his old office. He completed his community service. He called me on my birthday in March. He said, "I know I don't have the right to ask you to forgive me." I said, "You're right. You don't have that right. But you can earn it." He was quiet. I said, "Start with your daughters. That's where you start." He said he would try. I don't know what kind of man my son will become from here. I know what kind of man he has been, and it has broken something in me that I don't think heals all the way. But I also know that I raised him, and somewhere underneath the greed and the panic and the terrible calculation he made on that October morning, there was a person I knew when he was 7 years old and afraid of thunderstorms, and he would come and find me in the dark. I have not forgotten that person. I just can't protect him from himself anymore. What I know is this. I am 63 years old. I live in a house with forest green shutters on Birchwood Lane in Columbus, Ohio. The accounts are full again. The dog is asleep by the back door. The crossword is on the table. I changed the locks in November. And then, last spring, I had a new key made. I haven't given it to anyone yet. But I'm keeping it, for when the time is right. I earned the right to decide when that is. And nobody, not my son, not a man in a gray sedan, not anyone, will take that from me again. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Not just what Curtis did, but what made it possible. And the honest answer is that I made it possible. Not because I was foolish, but because I trusted without verifying, and I gave without limits, and somewhere along the way I let my son believe that my love for him meant he could do whatever he needed to do and I would absorb it. That's not love. That's a lesson I taught him without meaning to, and he learned it the way children always learn the things we don't intend to teach. There's a kind of cause and effect that doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, over years, out of small decisions. Every time I sent money without asking questions, every time I smoothed over something he did that wasn't right, every time I chose his comfort over my own honesty. I was adding to something. I didn't see it as a pattern. I saw it as being a good mother. But patterns don't care what you call them. They just keep building until something breaks. What Curtis did was wrong. I want to be clear about that, because I'd noticed that when a mother tells a story like this one, people sometimes look for the part where she blames herself. And I'm not doing that. He made a choice. He made it deliberately, over 11 days, in careful increments designed not to be noticed. That's not panic. That's a plan. And the accountability for that plan belongs entirely to him. But I've also had to be honest with myself about what I want my life to look like from here, and what kind of woman I am when nobody is testing me. The truth is that the person who came through this, who called the bank, called Vivian, filed the report, closed the door on the man in the gray sedan, that person was always inside me. I just hadn't needed her in a long time. Franklin was here, and then he wasn't. And I spent 9 years being careful and quiet and grateful just to still be standing. I forgot that standing isn't the same as living with your full strength. Estelle at 63 is not the same woman as Estelle at 54, sitting in a bedroom for 2 days unable to make a phone call. Something in me hardened into something useful. I don't mean I became cold. I mean I became clear. There's a difference. Cold people close doors and leave them locked. Clear people understand when to open them and when to hold them shut, and they make that decision themselves. Hugh told me something I hadn't known, and it shook me, and I let it shake me, and then I made a decision about what to do with it that had nothing to do with punishment or score settling. I found Gerald's daughter, and I gave her what I could. That's not virtue. That's just what seemed right when I sat quietly long enough to hear myself think. Curtis has a long road. I don't know if he'll walk it well. What I know is that the road is his to walk, and my job is no longer to carry him down it. My job now is to live in my house, with my dog, with my forest green shutters, and let the people who deserve a key earn one. That's what I know at 63. It took everything I had to learn it. I'm not giving it back.